Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Bonds and Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. The espresso martini hit my silk scarf before I even saw her coming. One dark fan of coffee and vodka arced across the amber fabric, seeping into the weave like a bruise spreading under skin. Lila Monroe's mouth made a perfect apologetic O. Her eyes did not. "Oh no, Evelyn," she said, bright as a maitre d' on opening night. "I'm such a klutz. But, look, the stain actually gives it a little thrift store chic." The string lights over the hospital's rooftop garden hummed. Somewhere beyond the glass railing, the harbor struck metal against itself. Halyards buoys the soft ring of a channel bell. Conversations around us stalled and gathered in the corners like spilled ice. Michael, my son, discovered something urgent in the glow of his phone. At the far end of the terrace, Carol Monroe, Lila's mother, gave two tidy corrective claps, as if to fix the moment to her liking. "I'll take care of the dry cleaning," Lila added, and turned her apology to the crowd, not to me. "Happens to the best of us." She lifted a cocktail napkin to the scarf like a stage prop, dab, more performance than aid. Her perfume gardenia with a clean tied note beneath arrived a beat late and stayed too long. I held the napkin in my tongue. It was a handsome fundraiser. The hospital foundation had set dozens of little round tables candlelight domed under etched glass programs folded like sailboats. Donors wore jewel tones and good intentions. A jazz trio rotated through standard Stella then polka dots and moonbeams music that doesn't apologize for the way it knows every bar. The foundation chair was midway through thanking families like the Hearts when the espresso bloomed across my scarf. "This way," Lila said, guiding me out of the frame of attention with a hand on my elbow she didn't own. "Let's get you patched up." In the ladies' room, she watched me in the mirror while I ran the scarf under cool water, the amber turning umber, then a stubborn, muddy halo. There are women who can apologize. There are women who can win. Lila understood only one of those verbs. "Evelyn," she said softly, "accidents happen. I hope you won't make this big." The word big arrived tiny and sharp attack pressed into my palm. I folded the wet scarf once, twice, and set it across the paper towel dispenser. "You're right," I said. "It doesn't have to be anything at all." When we re-emerged, the party had repaired itself. The band had moved on to "I'll Be Seeing You." Michael stood with two partners from his firm, nodding at something that didn't require him to disagree. Carol occupied a small court near the silent auction table, explaining, because she always explained, how etiquette was less about rules than about kindness. Her eyes found the scarf at once quick as a gull on a crust. She smiled and tilted her head, a little sympathy, a little triumph. The breeze lifted the strung bulbs, and I felt the cool of the harbor work into my collarbones. For a moment, I imagined shaking out the scarf, draping it over the railing, letting the wind decide where it belonged. Instead, I folded it again and tucked it into my evening bag, a damp, expensive secret. "Favorite donors first." The foundation chair was saying into his mic, genial and loud. "Let's hear it for the Hearts and for Evelyn, who—" "That's our cue," Lila chirped, steering Michael forward. He glanced at me as if through glass. He didn't say, "Are you okay?" He didn't say, "Did she?" He said with his mouth not moving, "Not here." We stood for the applause. It had that familiar, harmless heat. A man from the board shook my hand and told me about his mother's surgery and how the nurses had been saints, absolute saints. I meant my answer when I said nurses were the country's backbone. Then Lila leaned toward the microphone. "And let's also toast to resourcefulness," she said brightly. "Evelyn's scarf is proof a little spill can reinvent a look. Laughter tidy and brief. It traveled, then died on a tile. It was not the worst thing to happen in my life. That honor belonged to an ICU room with a window that looked at a brick wall. Still, humiliation has its own temperature, a quick fever in the cheeks, then a cooling that feels like distance. I found mine, put it on, and smiled the kind of smile that opens and closes only in the mouth. The gala's venue sat atop a renovated cannery, all pine floors and very good, very conscious lighting. On the mezzanine, a clock with a pendulum swung inside a glass case, polished brass reflecting strung light. I watched it for a moment while a volunteer fastened bid numbers to easels. The pendulum didn't hurry, it never does. Mom, Michael said when he reached me at last, his voice lowered to the register of reason, one hand on my forearm, as if he remembered he had one. Lila didn't mean, she meant for everyone to think she didn't, I said, which is the same as meaning it. He looked past me at the harbor, then down at the phone again. Can we just keep this easy tonight? Of course, I said, because I know how to be gracious, because keeping the peace is the tax women pay on other people's comfort. I said my goodbyes, collected my wrap, thanked the chair, admired the view one last time, the way you admire a painting you can't afford, and rode the elevator down. In the lobby, the young man at the desk asked if I needed club soda for the stain. Club soda performs miracles, he said with a hopeful earnestness that did not know better yet. I told him I'd try some at home. Outside, October had clarified the sky to a clean dark blue you could lean against. A rideshare pulled to the curb. The driver had the radio on low, a late game far away. Tiny men running tiny yards. We drove the long way along the water. I watched the mastheads and the miles of dock light up in sections, as if the town were remembering itself one street at a time. When my husband died, the lawyers' friends of friends had spoken about trusts with the kind of calm people use when they are very sure of their math. It's temporary, they'd said, merely efficient. The lake house, the one Robert and I had refinished by hand, and optimism found its title nested in papers that put Michael and Lila's names in the places where mine had always lived. The arrangement saved someone something, they said. The arrangement was elegant, they said. People say elegant when they want you to stop asking. At a traffic light, the driver tapped the steering wheel in time to whatever the radio had switched to. He had a soft, weary beard. Rough party, he asked, without turning. Just a loud one, I said. Back home, the lake was a length of dark glass with the moon brushed on. The porch boards gave a little under my heels in the places they always had. I let myself in, set the scarf open on the kitchen island, turned on the under cabinet lights. Every house has two selves, the one it shows its guests and the one it saves for its owners. In the late lighted quiet, the second self returned the hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock near the pantry, the small, determined sound of hot water moving through old pipes. I filled a bowl and lowered the scarf, worked mild soap into the stain with 2 fingers. The espresso lifted and settled back, then lifted again in negotiation. The scarf smelled suddenly like hotel towels and pennies. I rinsed, pressed, and spread it on a clean towel beside the sink. The halo remained lighter, but there. I made tea, not because I wanted tea, but because hands like to be told what to do. Steam fogged the window in a soft square. On the counter, a stack of mail slouched catalogs a card with a gold border I hadn't opened 2 envelopes from the bank. I slid a nail under paper but didn't pull. I'm not naive. The moment on the roof had not been a wobble of heel or a fluke of balance. It had been a sentence written for a particular audience. The stain on my scarf in this light looked less like a mistake and more like a mark made to be measured. I turned off the faucet. The house settled once, then again. I folded the towel over the scarf and pressed. The weave remembered itself slowly, like a story deciding where it truly begins. By morning, the scarf had dried to a faint, stubborn halo the color of weak tea. I left it spread on the kitchen island and opened the blinds. The lake flashed in slats between the reeds. I ground coffee, measured water, and told my hands what to do until the house warmed to the small domestic sounds that mean you're not alone, the kettle beginning to murmur, the clock in the hall catching its breath at the top of the hour, the refrigerator seal letting go and settling again. Mail waited where I'd abandoned it. I carried the stack to the table I'd paid off 1 month before Robert's diagnosis and laid everything in rows, catalogs left. Charity appeals right, bank envelopes in the center. I slit the first envelope with a butter knife and read the balance like a weather report. The second held a statement that remembered me too closely. When I finished with the mail, I brought down the box from the pantry shelf marked tax and set it beside the coffee. I am not a detective. I am a widow who keeps records. The neatness helped. I lined the canceled checks along the wood grain from oldest to newest highlighter, uncapped a legal pad waiting for a column of dates, and another for amounts. Some entries were straightforward: a new furnace for the lake house after January's freeze roof repairs after last summer's hail. Others wore softer names: bridge loan emergency transfer temporary, until the handwriting blurred those words into something you could call kindness if you didn't look at totals. By the time the coffee went cold, I had a number: $52,480 across 26 months, not counting gifts labeled as gifts. I wrote it at the top of the page and drew a line under it because lines can mean endings when you don't have another kind at hand. At 10, my phone chimed. A text from Michael. Can I stop by late morning? I wiped the highlighter from my thumb and wrote back, doors open. He arrived with a bouquet from the grocery store stems, still in their plastic sleeve, and a look I recognized from when he was 10 and had come home with someone else's baseball mitt by mistake. Hey, Mom, he said, and set the flowers where the scarf had been drying. These are for you. They'll like a real vase, I said, and went to the cabinet. The vase we used for lilacs in May stood taller than the bouquet and made the flowers look honest for the first time. About last night, he began. Coffee, I asked. Yes, I poured. He took his mug the way he always has, one palm against the heat like it proves something. We sat. The lake lifted and set itself down in the background. He tried again. Lila felt terrible. She was showing off she tripped on the cord. It got away from her. Did it? I said and slid the legal pad into the space between us. I didn't push it at him. I just reduced the space and waited. He glanced at the numbers. What is this? A memory aid, I said. Mine, not yours. He looked, flipped one page, then another. Where did you? From my bank, from my files, from the checks you asked me to write. His mouth came half open and stayed there. Some of that was, gifts are separate. You'll find them in the envelope marked Christmas. He placed his hand on the pad the way a man might steady a map he's not sure he wants to read. He scanned the entries, stopped at a date that must have had a story attached, looked up and didn't tell it. 52,480, he said quietly. That's what my records show. He set his coffee down. We were drowning after the roof and the furnace. Lila's contract slowed. It all piled up. I understand roofs, I said. I understand heat in winter. He nodded, then seemed to remember something he was supposed to ask. Are you asking for it back? I'm asking what made it necessary. He leaned back, ready to explain, as if I had hired him to defend a client I'd never met. He talked about market volatility, about a contractor who split town, about a billing dispute with one of Lila's accounts. The words came dressed for a meeting. They didn't take off their coats. When he reached for his mug, his hand shook once, then stopped. Michael, I said, if the checks stop, can you and Lila keep what you've built? He set both hands on the table and looked at a knot in the wood as if it might suggest the right answer. The quiet stretched until it had a shape. We'd manage, he said finally. How, I said, not unkindly. He swallowed. We'd cut back on what I asked. He lifted his shoulders, and for a second the outline of the boy I knew rose and fell around the man sitting there. He didn't list anything. He didn't have to. We both knew what counted as essential in a house with 2 sinks installed for the sake of a magazine page. We can take care of the dry cleaning, he added after a silence so long it could have been a decision. Lila asked me to say that. It's not the scarf, I said. He nodded as if he agreed, then stood as if he didn't. I should get back to the office. I walked him to the door. On the way, he saw the scarf where it had returned to dry on the island. He touched the corner that wasn't stained. It's a good color, he said. It is, I said. When he was gone, I sat again with the papers. I copied the totals to a clean sheet and made the handwriting careful the way people write in a ledger when they guess someone else might have to read it later. I put the copies in a plain manila folder and labeled the tab with the month and the word expenses in lowercase, because lowercase looked less like an accusation. By 1 o'clock, the lake light had shifted from pewter to bright steel. I changed clothes and drove into town. Carol Monroe's studio fronted a street of lamps that wore wreaths in December and hanging baskets in July. The window display promised small tables, place cards in the language of kindness in gold script across a photograph of teacups that had never known a dishwasher. Carol answered the bell on the door, wearing a dress the color of polished bone and a smile she had tried on before. "Evelyn," she said, delighted to be delighted. "What a treat. I was just about to put on the kettle." "That would be lovely," I said, because the rules of engagement don't forbid boiling water. She led me to a room designed for forgiving light pale walls, forgiving mirrors, forgiving chairs you could forgive yourself for sinking into. On a sideboard, a tiered tray held mapped out civilization cucumber on white smoked salmon folded into itself, lemon bars cut to the exact shape of their recipe. The kettle clicked. She poured. The tea was perfect. It tasted like something arranged. "You must be exhausted after last night," she said, pressing a napkin into my hand with the same deliberate gentleness with which one might calm a skittish horse. "Events can be so unpredictable." "Some of them," I said. She smiled with her whole face. "Lila's mortified." "I'm sure she is," I said, and stirred nothing. "Michael said she offered to handle the cleaning." "She did," I said. He relayed the offer. "Good, then it's done." The tea sat hot and golden in the porcelain, and for a moment I watched my own mouth bend in the reflection on the surface. "There's one other thing," I said. I placed the manila folder on the low table between us and slid it forward with 2 fingers as if I were returning a borrowed book I'd taken care to keep uncreased. "Do you know these names?" She didn't reach for the folder. "Which names are we referring to, dear?" "Grant Calder," I said. "Noah Vance." Like a good actress, she didn't let anything happen to her face. She reached for a sandwich instead and arranged it weightlessly on her plate. "Common enough names," she said. "Bankers, actors, husbands," I said. She set the plate down without eating. It made no sound. "I believe you're mistaken." "I checked county records," I said. "Mistakes were corrected there years ago." Carol lifted her chin a degree. "Old chapters don't belong in the new book." "Books have indexes," I said, and now I did push the folder to her side. She took it, opened it halfway, kept a finger marking her place as if the pages might retreat. She looked at 3 documents long enough to recognize the shapes of letters under their black bars and closed the folder again with care. "This is spite," she said. "It doesn't suit you." "You were at the gala," I said. "You applauded." I applauded the chair's remark, she said, prim as a pressed hem. The chair spoke later. She took up her teacup and set it down without drinking. "Whatever happened on the roof was unfortunate." "Unfortunate things don't require an audience," I said. "You want an apology." She exhaled the sentence with the relief of a woman who has found a familiar path through woods she didn't plan to enter. "I can encourage her to—" "That would be one thing," I said. "This is another." She glanced at the window as if the street might volunteer a rescue. No one walked by. In the glass, our reflection sat with perfect posture. "Lila loves your son," she said. "She adores him." "People adore many things," I said. "Access, outcomes, applause." "She has her flaws," Carol said in a tone trained not to betray the specifics of any of them. "But she is loyal to family." "Which family?" I asked. She took that one and held it without answering. When she finally spoke again, the polite melody was gone from her voice. "What is it you think you're doing, Evelyn?" "Taking stock," I said. "Of my daughter." "Of myself," I said. "And of what I can read in black and white." She lifted one of the lemon bars and focused very hard on the dusting of sugar as if it were an instruction. "I'm sorry if anyone made you feel unwelcome," she said at last. "That's not what happened. You are determined to be offended. I'm determined to be accurate." We sat in a quiet that stitched itself around the room like a seam. In that quiet, her eyes softened, though her mouth did not. Softness is not the same as surrender. Lila has had complicated seasons, she said finally. Ambition goes strange in some climates. Ambition travels, I said. It finds its weather. She looked at her hands, then at the little clock on the sideboard, a miniature version of the one in the mezzanine case, its pendulum ticking a schoolteacher's metronome. I have a class in 10 minutes, she said in a voice that remembered being musical. I won't keep you, I said, and stood. She did too. We touched the same air without touching each other. At the door, she said, "You're not her mother. You don't know her heart." "I know what comes out of it," I said and left. Outside, the street had made itself orderly again. A delivery truck idled in yellow paint. A woman in a navy coat paused to fix her scarf. A gull dropped and caught its own shadow. I walked past the shop windows and saw my reflection losing its edges to the afternoon light. At the corner, the lighthouse showed itself across the harbor the way it always does when the day clears, white and improbable against the blue, a practical thing mistaken for a symbol by people who don't have to rely on it. Back home, I put the vase of grocery flowers on the dining room sideboard and set the manila folder beside the legal pad. The scarf lay where I had left it, the halo paler, now the weave almost itself. I lifted it, felt the fabric cool against my palm, folded it along its old crease, and slid it into its box. In the hall, the pendulum clock took another step and then another exact and indifferent proof that the length of a second is the same no matter who is counting. They arrived together just after 6, framed by the lake light falling through the front door's glass. Michael in his meeting suit with the tie loosened, a polite inch Lila in a navy dress that promised sincerity. She carried peonies wintered out of season and freighted with scent, and a long white envelope tucked under the bouquet like a secret it hoped to be mistaken for kindness. "Evelyn," she said bright and careful, "we're so grateful you could see us on short notice." "I live here," I said, and stepped back so the entry could hold all three of us without deciding what we were to one another. In the kitchen, I set the peonies in the lilac vase. They made the room look like someone else was happy. Lila placed the envelope on the island aligned to the edge, then nudged it straighter. Michael stood as if the floor might be grated and he'd roll if he didn't hold very still. "We put together a plan," Lila said, tapping the envelope with a manicured finger. "A way to resolve things in a way that's fair for everyone." "Coffee?" I asked. "No thanks," she said. "Too late in the day." Michael glanced toward the dining room where the table waited under its runner, empty, except for the bowl of fruit that makes houses look prepared for guests. I carried the envelope to the table, set out 3 placemats without thinking, then put them away because we weren't eating. We sat anyway, a form of civility. Lila slid the envelope open with the thumbnail and drew out a typed document clipped at the corner with the kind of gold clip people buy to suggest their paperwork has an inheritance. "We're proposing monthly payments of $250, she said evenly, for 36 months. "It's realistic. It's responsible." Michael kept his eyes on the document. "We can do more later," he added, as if the words could stand in for dollars until dollars arrived. I read it. It had numbers, dates, polite verbs. It had a round total that did not meet the number on my legal pad by an order of magnitude. It had their signatures at the bottom, not yet inked, as if the promise itself could be written by thinking about it long enough. I returned the paper to the neat stack it wanted to be. "It's a beginning," Leela said. "It is," I said, "of something." Lila offered a smile calibrated to the occasion. "We're committed to making this right." "What is this?" I asked. "The balance," she said promptly. "The misunderstanding." "Not the scarf," Michael said, attempting humor. It landed on the table and lay there. He cleared his throat. "Mom, we're trying." "Yes," I said. "I can see the trying." I reached for the manila folder I had set nearby and placed it beside Lila's papers. The folder was plain, the contents were not. I tried too. Lila did not touch it. "What's in there?" "Facts," I said. "Our proposal," Michael began. "Is noted," I said. "And this is mine." Her hand hovered, then settled on the folder. She opened it and tilted it away from me as if to cast shade over the paragraphs. She skimmed with the speed of someone trained to look for where the teeth are. Her smile did not change, but her throat did. "These are public filings," she said. "Anyone can say anything in a complaint." "They can," I said. But the copies of settlement agreements weren't written by anyone. The copies of internal memos weren't either. She flicked a page back into the folder as if returning a bird to a cage. You've been very busy. Not busy, I said, focused. Michael reached for the folder. She kept her hand on it for half a second too long, then let him take it. He read more slowly than she had, the way a man reads his own blood work. Lila. He looked up at her as if he could find a different document in her face. Expense reimbursement disputes happen, she said, each word stacked neatly atop the next. I traveled for those companies. I fronted costs. Accounting departments lose receipts, lawyers posture. None of that is unusual. The allegation about the corporate card, he said, tapping the line with one finger. The card was in my name, she said. I was authorized. We disagreed about timing. It was resolved. Your resolution cost them $12,000, I said. It cost me my job. She redirected the sentence as if she were pouring it. And the other line, Michael said, quieter now. She met his eyes full on, no slant, no adornment. We've discussed that. We haven't, he said. We will, she replied. I closed the folder because paper doesn't need to see what people say to one another. Lila, I said. On the roof last night you performed an accident. In this room you've brought a performance of contrition. I've accepted neither. Evelyn, she said, voice softening into something like exasperated tenderness, you are making this unpleasant. I'm making it accurate, I said. Michael spread his hands. Mom, the plan is a start. We'll add to it when my bonus clears. We just need some runway. $250 a month for 3 years, I said. That doesn't cover the shortest word in this room. It shows good faith, Lila said. Good faith would have kept the drink upright, I said, and did not look away while I said it. Her smile dropped like a coin's other side. You don't like me, she said simply. I like the truth, I said. And I like family, she said, as if the two were often at odds, and she knew which one threw better parties. Michael and I are building a life. We've had a run of expenses. You know how that goes. He's told me how generous you can be. Michael flinched at the word can, as if it were a door she meant to keep open by foot. What are you asking exactly? Lila continued. Forgiveness. A pound of flesh. You have the folder, you have the table, you have the house. What else? I'm asking for the thing that lets the rest of those mean anything I said. Respect. She laughed once. It was not a kind sound. I brought you flowers. The vase is doing most of that work, I said. The air settled. The pendulum in the hall swung with such regularity it began to sound insolent. Michael rubbed his forehead with the heel of his hand, then lowered it, then put the hand flat on the table like he was ready to swear. Lila, he said, his voice careful, did you tell me the truth about the Calder contract? Not now, she said, still looking at me. Now, he said. She turned to him with a grief she could produce on command. Why are you letting her drive this? She wants to control you. She wants us to live by her ledger. She didn't sign up for our marriage. I did. I signed the checks, I said. And you signed them gladly, she shot back. You loved being needed. And you loved needing, I said. Michael stood paced once to the window and back the room too small for a man who had taught himself to move in conference rooms. He stopped behind his chair palms on the back, stepping around his own paws. I need to separate some things, he said. I need to figure out, Lila said. Figure out she's been spoon-feeding you a narrative and you're asking for a thinking break? He didn't rise to it. He sat instead, a choice harder on the spine. I'm staying here tonight, he said quietly. Something in Lila's face turned without moving. It was a trick of mirrors, of light, of angles, or it wasn't. She gathered the peony's glossy leaves with 2 fingers and then released them as if deciding not to break something she couldn't put back. If you walk out on me now, she said, you will regret it. I'm not walking out, he said. I am sitting down. The word seemed to land differently than he intended. She stood the navy dress falling into obedience and reached for the typed plan as if she couldn't bear to leave a proposal in a house that didn't accept it. Keep the flowers, she said brightly, the brightness returning like stage lights switched back on. They'll last a week if you change the water. Good night, Lila, I said. At the door, she paused, hand on the frame. For the first time that evening, she looked not at me or Michael, but at the house, the pendulum's arc, the bowl on the entry table that always catches keys, the coat hooks, with only 2 coats hanging. She made a small, almost invisible calculation. You think you're the lighthouse? She said, without inflection, and left. The house exhaled. Michael stayed standing at the table as if the air might shift again and require him to remain ready. Finally, he sat, and when he did, he slumped the imperceptible inch a proud man allows himself when no one but his mother is watching. I'm sorry, he said. The words had the weight of something heavy carried farther than intended. You're tired, I said. Take the guest room. He nodded. I'll be up early. In the kitchen, I changed the water in the vase because it was something to do. He carried his suit jacket over his arm down the hall like a flag taken down before weather. At the island, the scarf box waited where I'd left it. I touched the lid. I did not open it. I locked the front door, checked the back, checked the stove I hadn't used because the body likes rituals in uncertain weather. I switched off the lamps one by one until the house had the face it wears for sleeping. In the dark, the pendulum sound turned patient instead of insolent. I went to bed. The smoke alarm woke me at 2:14 a.m., a blade of sound that split the dream in the room at once. I was on my feet before I knew what the floor was. The second alarm followed from the hall, then a third from the kitchen. The air smelled wrong, sharp chemical, a sweetness that didn't belong to anything you would light on purpose indoors. Mom. Michael's voice from the far end of the hall, full and alert. You up? Here, I called and opened the bedroom door. He was already in the hall in a t-shirt and boxers, eyes clear. We moved not fast, not slow, the practiced pace of people who've been told once, by someone in a uniform, how to leave a place safely. At the top of the stairs, a smear of orange licked the edge of the kitchen doorway like dawn where dawn couldn't be. The deck, he said, and that was the right word. We went out through the sliding door, the cold hitting our bare legs like a second alarm. The night was bright with the wrong light. At the back corner of the house where the storage bench sits under the overhang and the grill waits out winter flames were raking up the cedar shingles in a climbing hand. The sound was a kind of eating. Phone, I said. He had it already dialing, already giving the words in the order they needed. Ma'am, are you outside? The dispatcher asked when I took the phone and told her the address, and that the house was wood and the wind was low. Yes. Stay there. We stayed. The lake threw back the fire in pieces. Across the yard, the neighbor's motion light sprang on and held. I could feel the heat against my shins and pulses. Michael took the hose from the bracket, turned the spigot, directed the stream at the base of the flames, the way training and instinct argue about. The water hissed. The flames answered by reaching higher where the siding had caught, and the pitch in the seams was doing what it does best. Sirens came as a single sound that separated into several as they neared. A cruiser arrived first, then the engine, then a second. Boots on the deck, commands. A firefighter in a helmet and calm walked past us with a nozzle, and a certainty that made my lungs believe in air again. Another directed us farther back onto the grass where frost had hardened the blade so each footfall sounded like breaking something small and brittle. I watched the men and the one woman work the line, uncoil the bright arc, tame the ladder against the eave, the pry bar making a new door for the water to go in where it would matter. The flames subsided from language back to noise, then from noise to steam, then from steam to smoke that made thinking feel like swimming. After a while, a man with a chief's helmet walked toward us, mask loose at his throat. Everyone out, he asked. Yes, I said, just us. Anyone else with the key, he asked. No, I said, and watched his eyes register that answer for reasons that belonged to someone else's report. He sniffed the air as if it could give a straight answer. Smells like accelerant, he said, not admiringly. He looked at the corner of the house now stripped to damp blackened wood. Fire started outside. That's the good news. Good news, I repeated, and felt the words find a place to sit that didn't hurt. A younger firefighter returned from the far side of the yard carrying a plastic planter I hadn't noticed was missing. He tipped it, and a thin stream of liquid ran onto the grass, then spread iridescent in the engine lights. "Gas," he said to the chief, "or something like it." The chief nodded once. "We'll call it in." He turned to us. "You folks have a place to go." "Yes," I said. "Here." "We'll need to ventilate and check for extension," he said. "You can't go back in until we clear it." "Of course," I said. The cold moved through my nightgown and stayed. Michael put his arm around my shoulders, not a gesture, a temperature. A neighbor called across the fence to ask if we were okay. He had pulled on a coat and a pair of unlaced boots. The porch camera to his left blinked an indifferent red. "I'll send you the footage," he said into the night voice, steady with the usefulness people want to offer at 3 a.m. "Thank you," I said and meant it. The chief walked the back perimeter with the flashlight, the beam peeling away layers of dark. He stopped once crouched, stood again with a small noise. When he came back, he had a face that told me there were details other people collect so you don't have to. "You're lucky," he said simply. Wind didn't have an appetite tonight. I nodded. The deck boards steamed where the water cooled them back to themselves. The hose lay sleeping like a good dog. Somewhere in the trees, an owl asked whatever questions owls ask. The peonies in the kitchen would have been tipping their heads toward the sink if the window hadn't fogged. When the all-clear finally came for the downstairs, we went in through the front, careful where men had made new puddles and new footprints. The kitchen smelled like someone had attempted to teach it a lesson. The sliding door glass had a spider web in the corner where something hot had tested it and lost. On the counter, the scarf box waited ash faint on the lid. That wiped away with one pass of my sleeve. Michael looked at the blackened siding beyond the glass and then at me. He didn't ask anything. He didn't have to. He took out his phone and scrolled to the neighbor's text to the thumbnail that showed a figure moving at the edge of the yard at 1:52 a.m., too grainy for a face clear enough for a story. He set the phone down as if placing a cup on a saucer. The clock in the hall took its measure. The lake beyond the glass did what water does when fire is a memory. It kept being water. We stood there in the lit kitchen, our feet wet inside our dry house, and learned the new shape of the room. By late morning, the kitchen no longer smelled like a bad idea, only like wet ash and boiled coffee. Detective Avery Collins arrived in a canvas jacket with a notebook that looked like it had lived in the same pocket for years. She walked the deck with the chief, then the yard, then the strip of crushed shell between our porch and the neighbor's fence, her gaze skimming low like light across water. When she came inside, she took the chair at the end of the table and set her notebook down square to the wood. "Start at 2:14, she said, pen poised. We told it clean the alarms, the orange at the corner window, the hose, the iridescent. Pour from a plastic planter that hadn't been holding anything as innocent as geraniums. Collins nodded at the right places. She didn't waste our words. "Security footage," she asked. "Next door," I said. He sent a clip. Michael texted the link. She watched on his phone, thumb steady, as she dragged the timeline back and forth. 1:52, she said, stopping on a frame that showed a person moving in the backyard seam where shadow meets shadow. Hood. No face. Leaves the way they came. She kept the phone. "We'll pull the original." She walked the house once more this time, looking not at walls but at the way we lived. Key bowl on the console stack of bills, the scarf box on the island with a gray print on the lid. I hadn't wiped clean yet. Her gaze recorded without accusing. When she left, she said, "We'll be in touch this afternoon." She was. At 4:15, she called from a number the phone labeled unknown. "Ms. Hart," she said. "We picked up a man named Reed Salazar. Prior for ignition-type offenses. Traffic camera caught his car turning off Harbor Road around 1:30. Hardware store receipt from 11:08 p.m. shows 2 one-gallon cans and a siphon. We're talking to him." "Does he talk back?" I asked. "Not yet," she said. "They usually do before dinner." She was right. At 6:40, she called again. He says a woman met him at Dockside Tavern 3 nights ago. Blonde, 30-something. Offered $6,000 in cash to make a loud problem small. He says she showed him photos of your back deck and told him where to pour. Claims she wanted a scare, not a tragedy. He wants a deal. Michael stood in the doorway, tie-off eyes on my face, listening without interrupting. Do you need us tonight? He asked when I hung up. Tomorrow morning, Colin said on the next call. Come down for a statement. Bring anything you think is part of this. We brought the neighbor's USB drive, our phones, and nothing we couldn't bear to see tagged and bagged. At the station, Collins took us through the timeline again, then slid a page and a pen across to me. We're going to show Mr. Salazar a lineup, she said. We may ask you to look at one too. Public places have a way of remembering things. Dockside has cameras. We sat in an interview room with a table bolted to the floor, while a tech with cuff sleeves copied what our devices knew. Through the glass, I watched a hallway where officers walked the same 10 yards over and over, each with a different reason. After a while, Collins returned with still images printed on matte paper. Dockside Tavern's cameras saw better than you'd expect for a place where most people preferred not to be remembered. One frame showed Reed at the end of the bar with his shoulders hunched the way men hunch when their lives are too heavy for their bones. 2 stools away, a profile I knew Lila's hair pinned up in the style she called effortless and achieved with 6 pins you could track across the room, her hand describing a shape in air, like a person drawing a plan. In the next frame, she leaned closer. In the third, he did. I signed my statement. Michael signed his. We went home in a light that had lost its temperature. The deck was a dark map of rectangles where the firefighters' boots had stood. Inside the scarf box waited exactly where I had left it, patient as furniture. The indictment came fast. Grand juries move with a speed that looks like conscience when you're the one waiting. Lila was arrested on a Thursday afternoon outside her Pilates studio, the kind of place with water bottles that cost more than a winter coat in my childhood. Bail was set. She made it. The paper ran a small photo of her leaving the courthouse, chin-lifted sunglasses larger than necessary. Michael didn't bring the paper inside. I saw it anyway, caught between a box of clementines and a stand of tulips at the market, the headline above her like a hat she hadn't chosen. Pretrial stretched into winter. Collins called once a week early, once a week late, as if to ring the house with the assurance that someone practiced and paid attention. The prosecutor, a woman with a soft voice and knees that never locked, met with us in a conference room whose windows looked across to other windows holding other conference rooms. She asked questions that sounded simple and were not. How had the money moved? Who had keys? What did we notice when we didn't think we were noticing? When the trial date was set for February, the courthouse hallways found a way to echo even with carpeting. Lila arrived each day in neutral suits that threw no light. Her attorney, a man with good hair and an ironic pocket square, built a narrative with careful hands, scorned matriarch, ambitious daughter-in-law, a man pulled between. There was no mention of coffee on silk. The scarf had never been present in those rooms. There was only the question of flame and the question of who asked it to speak. Reed testified first. He had the posture of a person trying to disappear into his own shoulders. He told the story in nouns, not adjectives. Dockside 6 grand photos, siphon planter pour match. When the defense cross-examined, they pressed where you'd expect his record. His need for a deal, the amount of alcohol he'd imbibed between the second stool and the parking lot. Reed answered without embroidery. He said he'd taken the money because his rent was late, and an engine doesn't forgive neglect. He said he hadn't wanted anyone hurt. He didn't look at us. I preferred it that way. The prosecutor drew a straight line with other witnesses, the clerk who sold the gas cans, the bank officer who explained the cash withdrawal of $6,000 from an ATM near Lila's gym at 10:56 p.m., the bartender at Dockside who didn't remember faces but remembered the bill with 100 folded inside a 20 for no reason. The jury watched. They took notes in the old-fashioned way with pens that leaked a little. When the state introduced the neighbor's footage, it played on a screen larger than any television I've owned. The figure on the edge of the yard was no less faceless when magnified. The act was no less itself. On the third day, they played audio captured by a motion-activated recorder installed by the firefighters. When they vented the kitchen, the machine flashing to life for 30 seconds at a time. Mostly it captured boots and orders. Once it captured my voice telling Michael to sit, that I would change the water in the vase. Once faint and far a phone buzzing on a counter we hadn't heard under the alarms. The call log showed a missed call from a number we knew as Lila's. The timestamp sat between the first siren's approach and the first hose's chill. The courtroom listened to silence as if it were a confession. Lila took the stand on the fourth day. She'd been coached well, her words landed on the soft side of important. She said she loved Michael, that she would never harm his home, that she'd met dozens of people at bars and could not be responsible for the stories they later told. She said the cash withdrawal was for a vendor who didn't take cards. She said she couldn't remember what vendor. She cried when she said the word home and did not when she said the word money. The attorney with the pocket square placed each question like a paving stone and walked her down a path that tried to avoid certain puddles. The prosecutor did not raise her voice. She asked Lila how she'd known where the planter sat on our deck. Lila said she had been over many times for dinners and could imagine a planter anywhere. The prosecutor asked why Lila's phone had pinged a tower near our street at 1:48 a.m. the night of the fire. Lila said towers are imprecise. The prosecutor asked why the ATM camera showed her with her hair pinned the same way it was pinned in the bar's footage. Lila said she wore it that way often. The prosecutor asked if she had ever met a man named Reed Salazar. Lila said she didn't know everyone she passed in rooms. The prosecutor asked if $6,000 was a number that meant anything to her. Lila said all numbers meant something to her because she was a consultant. When the lawyers were done, the judge gave instructions with the measured cadence of a man who had practiced not to be misheard. The jury filed out. The clock in the back of the courtroom moved its minute hand, then another. On the second day of deliberations, just after lunch, the bailiff took his place and told all rise. The verdict came bound in the simplicity that verdicts prefer. On the count of arson in the first degree, guilty. On the count of conspiracy to commit arson, guilty. On the count of reckless endangerment, guilty. The words didn't arrive as thunder. They arrived as weight added ounce by ounce until my spine adjusted. Sentencing followed later. The judge looked at the statute, then at the damage photographs, then at the woman before him who had picked a house and attempted to teach it beer. He said a term that had a front number and a back number because our state still likes the idea that people change. The courtroom breathed out in a single mixed chord. Outside microphones waited. Reporters asked questions with earnest faces and pens that wanted verbs. I said as little as possible because words add up too. Michael stood beside me, tie in a pocket, knot around his neck. The sky had that February glare, bright without warmth. We crossed the courthouse steps without tripping. The car was where we left it. We drove home the long way along the water, past the cannery and the lamp posts, and the bend where the lighthouse shows itself, because it can, because the weather lets it, because light doesn't ask permission from anyone. The contractors finished in March, when the lake still carried winter along its surface like a last thought. New cedar ran clean along the back wall. The wiring in the kitchen glinted where the drywall hadn't been painted yet. The sliding door opened and closed without a complaint. The chief from that night stopped by to sign a final form and ran a hand over the new shingles. Better than before, he said, not as praise, just as measurement. I rehung the pendulum clock in the hall. It took 3 tries to make it level. When it settled, the first tick sounded like a room remembering its name. On the island, the scarf box waited. The dry cleaner had done what he could. The halo was nearly gone, a whisper you'd miss unless you knew where to look. I folded the scarf along its old crease and looped it over the back of the chair by the window. It caught the morning light and kept it. Michael sold the cottage he and Lila had staged for open houses with bowls of perfect lemons. He moved into an apartment with floors that clicked underfoot and a view of a parking lot that looked almost like a grid if you squinted. On Sundays, he brought over coffee and receipts. He opened a notebook and wrote dates and numbers in a neat hand that used to be reserved for other people's audits. When the first bank transfer hit my account, he stood at the sink and rinsed his cup as if there were something to scrub from the air. Principal and a modest interest, he said, every month. He didn't ask if it was enough. He made sure it matched the math. He started seeing a man with an office over the hardware store, a therapist who wore cardigans and kept a jar of marbles on his desk. On Wednesdays, Michael walked the 2 blocks from his office after work and sat in a chair with arms. Some evenings he arrived at my house afterward and didn't talk about it, which is another way of talking. He ate what I made and stacked the plates by the sink in exact even columns. When he left, the columns felt like a promise kept to gravity. In April, a letter came from the Department of Corrections with a victim notification pamphlet tucked inside. A checkbox asked if I wished to be alerted to any changes in custody. I checked the box and mailed it back. A week later, Carol sent a note on creamy paper with a monogram that curled like ribbon. She apologized for dissonance, the word she chose when other words might rattle the china. She hoped we were well. She asked nothing. I put the note in a drawer with the warranty for the new door and the extra key for the meter reader. Spring found its way over the lawn in stages. The peonies in the garden, the real ones, not the wintered imports, pushed red knuckles through the soil, then furled, then opened. I staked them with soft twine and moved the vase to the sideboard to make room for their cut cousins. The house smelled like clean paint for a while, then like nothing. Then, like lemon, when the sun warmed the wood where I'd wiped it down. On a clear Friday in May, I set a table on the dock. 4 plates, linen napkins, the cheap wine everyone likes in weather that forgives it. The neighbors came down the steps with a pie and a story about their dog discovering the utility trench. Michael brought a loaf still warm through its paper bag. The light slid along the lake the way it does when you can see the wind by watching the water, not the trees. We ate and then we lingered. The talk drifted to nothing that required a defense. When the plates had been replaced by hands, around glasses, Michael stood with his wine and didn't clear his throat. He looked at me, then at the water, then back. To plain language, he said a little wry, and to doing the math in ink. We raised our glasses. A loon called from somewhere beyond the point and made the sound other birds don't try for fear of getting it wrong. The couple from next door walked home in the kind of blue that forgives shadows. Michael and I stacked plates and carried them up the steps to the kitchen. He washed, I dried. The clock in the hall kept time without comment. When the counters were bare again, he opened the drawer where I keep the scissors and the tape, and took out the folder labeled Expenses, the one with the lowercase tab. He added a new page to the back. He wrote the date, the amount, the balance remaining. He drew a line under it. The line didn't look like an ending. It looked like part of a ledger that had decided to be honest. We went back outside with 2 chairs and sat at the edge of the dock. The lighthouse threw slow, certain punctuation across the far water. The scarf at the kitchen chair was visible through the glass, a small flag of color inside a house that had learned to hold its heat. My son rested his forearms on his knees and let his shoulders drop the inch a man allows when he is not performing for anyone. You kept the scarf, he said. I did, I said. It suits the light, he said. It does, I said. We watched the lake trade quiet with the wind. Somewhere to our left, a fish took the surface and left a ring that never found the shore. When the chill came off the water, we folded the chairs and went inside. The clock ticked, The door latched, and the house made the soft, finished sound it makes when the night enters politely. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.